Hello and welcome to episode 5 of After the Hack. I'm your host, Manzeka, and I'm joined by Peter, Tom and Femi. After the Hack is a limited podcast series where we'll be breaking down the new ITV drama The Hack, which is all about the phone hacking scandal. We're going to be deep diving into the hack and what came after. We're at episode 5 now, where we've got Nick and Alan, who've teamed up with the New York Times in an effort to make the hacking scandal catch fire. We've also got Dave, who's being challenged in the witness box at the Morgan murder trial. And also Dave is going to be taking some new measures to help Nick in his quest to expose wrongdoing at the News of the World. So we've got this kind of convergence of these two previously separate stories starting to meld together. As usual, let's start with the big picture stuff. What do we think about episode 5?
Well, it warms up a bit, doesn't it? I do feel the second half, without any spoilers, it picks up. And there's a line, Doug Lyman, I think he says, he's made things like The Bourne Identity, didn't he? He said, you start writing checks and the second half of the show you start cashing them, right? You set up all these people and you're wondering how they come together. And the big, whether it works or not, the sense we had these two worlds, didn't we? Had the police investigation and we had the newspaper, and then suddenly, Shazam, they've joined together, which I think increased the pace a bit. But can I say, from a personal point of view, knowing Alistair, and I'm not sure that really came across, it hasn't really come across that well before Dave Cook was involved, the family was campaigning for this, and they forced the police into these multiple inquiries. But I don't think this is where journalism departs from human rights and human nature. So the family were devastated by the collapse of the trial after all these years. So it's 2011, isn't it? And Daniel had been murdered 24 years beforehand, and they think they finally got them. I think the pre-trials last 3 years. It collapses. It's kind of a slow motion collapse. And so they're devastated. But Nick Davis is jubilant. Because finally, because contempt of your listeners, watchers might not understand, while something's going through pre-trials, nothing can be reported because you don't want to sway a jury. This is all stuff the jury cannot hear. And so it's locked away in a vault until the moment there's no chance of another jury trial, because you don't want to contempt the jury. And then persuade them, unlike in America, who's right and wrong. So that was a moment of devastation for a family. Nick Davis was jubilant, and they could publish this great piece, The Empire of Crime. And that is an awful moment. I know that Alistair, it was awkward for the family that Nick was so happy. Nick was, because he was working with Dave Cook, was burying that a bit. Dave Cook gets arrested for working with the journalist, and anyway, then we'll give away what happens. But I can say what's not in the show. He's also arrested again in 2014-15 for partly for working with me. He gets his house raided and his garden dug up, and he has been passing on confidential files to journalists, but in the public interest. I mean, we must say this about Dave Cook, because in a way, this episode is going to be a lot about that it was misfeasance, not malfeasance, what happened with his witness, Eden. But without him, I don't think any of this would have come. Without Daniel Morgan murder and then pushing for more and more inquiries, they go to Europe, they have judicial reviews. And without Dave Cook inadvertently, in a way, investigating this, and it happened actually before he got involved in 1998. It's called the Third Motor Investigation, put a bug in Southern Investigations. And Bob Quick, who was the commander there, we looked at the files, and they're just there for 6 months with this bug, which takes like 6 months to get through the wall. And then they have an undercover officer called Derek Haslam. And this relates to future trials, actually, but I could talk about that another time. They discover 40 media crimes. Nothing is done about it, but that's when... And then Dave Cook, I think, when he goes into Abelard 2, which is really 2004, he gets involved with 5-6 years later. It kind of comes out of the blue, partly because of what we've already seen, him being surveyed by News of the World. It's actually Maz Mahmood's cameraman, Bradley Page, realizes the media involvement because the police have steered clear of that. So anyway, just a bit of background for your viewers.
I think the point you make about how Nick was jubilant kind of highlights the problem with the show in terms of the lens through which we're viewing this stuff, because obviously we don't see Nick being as jubilant as you describe.
We see mariachi bands.
We see mariachi band. We see Dave Cook being utterly devastated by the loss, but where was the proper humanization of A, the family, B, Morgan himself?
Yeah.
Because there's so many missed opportunities. We could have opened the show, at least that section of the show, rather than seeing Dave Cook arrested. Let's see the original murder.
Yeah.
Let's see that. Let's see the grief of the family, and that this is what we're fighting for. So we understand the stakes from an emotional standpoint. And instead, we get Dave Cook being upset. We see the vertigo in the courtroom, but it's not hitting as hard as it could.
He's not the ultimate victim. No.
Yeah.
He is a victim of all this.
Yeah.
And I think the same with Nick, and isn't it? You sense that what's at stake reputationally for the paper is higher than what's actually happened to the victims of phone hacking or something. I mean, the problem was they couldn't. Is Alistair would not give them the rights to do his story, and that does inhere in him. But and so in a way they rightly didn't try to show the murder, because that would be kind of impinging on his story. Obviously, I worked on him extensively, wrote a book with him, and he was the first true detective, and so was Daniel. And in a way, that's respect. And had they done that, I do think that's the true story. I think Daniel's body lies under all this press malfeasance. Southern Investigations was the one-stop shop for the dark arts, unique in this world, and because they got away with murder, they went and corrupted the whole of the British press. But it would be another story.
Yeah, because I think this is the episode where you have these two giant stories finally clashing together in a way the show was sort of promising from the start. But then one of those stories very quickly falls away because the trial has collapsed, and you even have the scene with Alistair saying this was supposed to be about Daniel. But like you say, Femi, by this point we've not heard very much about Daniel. We've heard about the very dry nature of the police investigations. We've heard about the murky underworld of the surveillance and the involvement of the News of the World, but Daniel himself and the family, and I know that the story obviously wasn't available, but even a treatment of this was still a murder, an unsolved murder, a very tragic case that involves a family and, a lack of justice. And we see in this episode that prospect of justice collapse away, and then it disappears from the show altogether. So it's another example of why trying to combine them both in the same show does a disservice to both stories. And the fact that we are getting, as you say, Peter, this is where the phone hacking story really starts to accelerate. And it's why these last 3 episodes, from what we've seen, are all about phone hacking and the way it finally explodes in the scandal. But to have built up this story and this intrigue about this real life murder and for it then to fall away felt like a real shame. And then we don't really hear about it until, a little snippet at the end of the episode, an on-screen narration saying they deny anything happened, it's still unsolved. But it just still felt to me very strange that you tried to, and like you say, Peter, you can look at it from 2 ways, in that on the one hand the Daniel Morgan murder was one of many examples where the toxic corruption by News International in the police, in politics, had influenced something so major. But then on the other hand, as you say, it was the epitome of that corruption and that malfeasance.
It's the beginning of it.
It's the beginning.
It's and what's not explored, it goes on. I mean, the cartel, if you like, of corrupt cops, underworld figures, and literally underworld figures, and the press. They used to call it the News of the World Regional Crime Squad because they were so close. Goes on, and it's related to the Stephen Lawrence murder. I mean, it's related. There's a connection with Jill Dando, as we know. So, but it is a vast story. I've struggled telling that story alone. And it does make me wonder. It does lift off again to me as we focus back on away from this genre of gritty cop stories and trials, back to mariachi bands. No, back to the kind of forensics of being a journalist and working with lawyers. Because that to me, watching that play out was maybe because I know less about it, was the more fun bit of it.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about the idea of like the victims being not really sort of well portrayed in this, or not having a big focus on them. There's also not a big focus on the villains, and that is starting to starting to really grate on me.
Yeah,
I'm waiting to get an inside view into. I want to see inside the News of the World, actually. I want to see, and not just the big guys. That your arch villain, who will obviously get later, Rupert Murdoch, Rebecca Brooks. Yes, we've had a bit of a taste of them, but also what about the sort of mid-level journalists, the ones who are doing the dirty work, the ones who are doing that delivery work. What's their story? How do you go from being presumably someone who gets into journalism because you probably think you're going to do an all right job, and then suddenly you're hacking people's phones? You know, what's that journey? And you can tell that journey without being overly sympathetic to those people, but saying that and showing that human story. How do humans become corrupted by the system, the institution? And so I think this really suffers from almost trying to tell the story too much from the hero's point of view. I'm seeing too much about how journalism is a noble profession in terms of viewing things through Nick.
Yes.
Great, I'm sure Nick's a great journalist, but I want to see the rot. I want to see the rot.
And it's
under
not
the
as if
floorboards.
it's not as if we don't know anything about that either, because you know, the New York Times investigation features prominently in this episode, and they speak to Sean Hoare, who was one of the major show business reporters at the paper, very close to Andy Coulson, and he spills the beans on. He showed Andy Coulson hacked messages. He was commissioned by Coulson to hack. He was involved in it. He dealt with but they spoke to many other people, not just about hacking, but about the culture at the News of the World and across the press industry. And there are so many quotes, anonymous and attributed to people from those papers, that really go into detail about that rot in the tabloid culture for a very long time. And I find it strange that this docudrama doesn't even mention that. It very briefly talks to Sean Hoare, who says, yes, Coulson told me, and we've got, okay, Coulson is now personally attributed. But all of the rest of the galaxy of unethical, illegal, horrid, abusive, corrosive activity that was going on in the press is kind of left to settle. The story, it seems that they treat it as if Nick's motivation was to get at a handful of editors and executives rather than to expose this whole practice of hacking and unlawful information gathering and invasion into privacy. It just felt very strange to me. And I mean, you know, the way they present the episode and that alliance of journalists and politicians and lawyers coming together is a very compelling story. And I wish it had come into the show much earlier to let it breathe a lot more and just show all the different elements, these 3 parallel tracks of investigation playing out over a very long period of time. That's a lot to try and cram into the last couple of episodes.
I'm saying this is really important, that because I know a lot, you know, of the phone hackers, or 2 of them. Dan Evans, who's crucial witness against Coulson in the trial, and Graham Johnson, who comes forward voluntarily. They're the only 2 journalists involved in hacking who voluntarily came forward. Or one, Dan became a witness of truth, and Graham said, look, I've done it, you know, convict me. It's so interesting. They're quite working class backgrounds. They came on, I'm a crusading journalist, all bastards in power, right? And then suddenly the pressures get on them, and they're damaged by it too. Dan Evans said, listening to people's voicemails damaged him. You get inside, and that culture, you're shouted at, you're measured by bylines, you get bonuses on bylines.
Absolutely.
It's this system that's pushing them to do this. And it's
the
very
workplace
exciting.
culture was appalling. You read in Hack Attack, Nick Davies spoke, the workplace culture was appalling.
Yeah, and it came out in the trial, Rebecca Book slamming doors if the pressure on them to earn money, because it's the era of sort of perhaps celebrity, that moment. But also the excitement. I spoke to a photographer actually early on before I met Alistair, and he'd photographed Diana having this fair, which is a big photograph made, and then he worked with Maz Mahmood a lot, and he'd said, you turn up, they had a target, I wasn't Sienna Miller, but somebody like that, there'd be 2 guys with a van, there'd be paps everywhere, we've got her phone records, we've got her travel records, we've got the bank statements, medical records, and it was Sienna Miller describes it, you know, she's being chased down the street by 12 burly men. If they weren't, it would be assault, stalking, it would be a crime if they weren't journalists. And that culture, that feral culture, you can see it now sometimes when there's a politician, the very like Angela Rayner, but it was, you know, the hue and cry and the access they had because of this illegality to everything. You couldn't move. I'm sorry, just on that, yes, Sienna Miller does appear on this. I think for the first time we see, don't we, there's a sense of the personal tragedy of it. What happens in that?
Yeah. So we get the appearance of Sienna Miller, who comes to the Guardian offices, and she explains the kind of personal nature of the phone hacking that she experienced and the ways in which she felt like she'd been betrayed by those sort of closest to her. So we start again, it is another celebrity, you know, another famous person, not necessarily the most sympathetic of people, I understand, but we do start to get maybe a bit of more of a glimpse into the personal cost and the real kind of emotional turmoil that the phone hacking was kind of creating for some of these people. Did we feel like that was a step forward?
Especially when it's a miscarriage that was her. So it did felt really personal, really painful. So they did. That was a good job again. Not ideal in terms of actually showing, because as we find out later, well, I think you said that the majority of the people that were in Mulcair's notebooks were ordinary people.
As Tom was saying.
Tom was saying that.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's such a massive range of people they could have highlighted, but instead we get Sienna Miller, which again is obviously heartbreaking because of what she went through. Yeah. But still.
But again, it matches in with the chronology of the investigation as it was going, because they were still discovering celebrities and politicians whose information was in Mulcair's notebook. And Sienna Miller was powerful enough to come forward and not just say, I want to pursue this, I'm not going to settle, I really want to take this to court. But then she was telling people, and I think that scene is partly a reenactment of her testimony at the Leveson inquiry, where she's talking very, very personally about, yes, I was a celebrity, and yes, I had relationships with the press, and I was in films, and you get to know the world of the media through that. But then the personal experience of being hacked, but not knowing you were being hacked, and creating a smaller and smaller circle of people who you don't trust. And eventually it's down to her own mother, and she thinks her own mother has released information about this incredibly tragic moment. So I thought that was, again, it's a moment that had to happen, and it's a really powerful scene. It could have happened many episodes earlier, because now we feel like we're really accelerating, and it does feel, you're right, like a kind of a huge revelatory moment. And we're still thinking, okay, but we know there were more. We know there were other people, and they do come eventually. But it's just that we've waited a long, long time for the first insight into what was the personal experience of being hacked and abused. It's all been about the investigations.
What's at stake for Nick and Dave.
It's the only thing about Sienna Miller, and this is really quite important, is because I've talked to so many people, especially around the Dan Wootton stuff, who would come forward. They're terrified of being in the public lens. They're terrified in that hue and cry I described. So that she stood, it had already impacted her career, the coverage, that she was willing to go against the press. Look what's happened to Prince Harry and Meghan. If you stand against them, they will non-stop point courageux to encourage the others, prove we will punish you day in, day out, articles, thousands of articles, because you've gone against us. So most actors will not come forward. Yeah. Even if they knew they were hacked, they want to keep it quiet. Sorry, Phil.
So this is the point. This is like, because I think one of the most powerful lines in this is when Max Mosley says, "You underestimate my fortune and my anger." It makes sense that they're highlighting these powerful people, because these are the only people who actually had the ability to fight back, and that's where it had to start. And it is. They don't really address it directly, but they are highlighting the problem that when you have these powerful people who are causing utter devastation to the lives of other people, the only people who can fight back are those who already have power. Yeah. And that's a functional problem with the system.
I've studied this a bit before, around the phone hacking before Daniel Morgan is, the press think they make and break, they control. It's a manufacturing of fame. We think, I was a kid, it's fame, something happens because you're talented. No, these people make it. I mean, the biggest one is watching footballers. Murdoch gets involved in Sky in football. They're making these millions out of Beckham. And then they have this sub-industry, which is hacking Beckham in his affairs. They make people, they break them. Jade Goody, Paul Gascoigne.
Yes, she's mentioned briefly, isn't she?
Yeah, I don't even have, and they do the same with politicians. Yeah. And it's eye-opening.
Yeah. We get the entrance of the Americans in this episode as well, in the New York Times. I don't know if we're meant to get the impression that Nick's not too happy to be handing off some of this story to the Americans. The story is going to get Yankified.
Well, at this point, I should say just how happy I am to see Rose Leslie in anything after Game of Thrones. I think just seeing her alive, it fixes something in me. But her character saying, I could always tell which kids weren't good at sharing at school. And pointing to Nick Davies not being happy sharing his toys with the New York Times.
What was she in Game of Thrones?
She was Ygritte. You know nothing, Jon Snow.
Her. Right.
I feel like when they're not in Game of Thrones, it was a completely different. So it's very difficult to recognise people.
No,
that was them.
The ginger from Beyond the Wall.
Yes. Who ends up? Yeah.
He's spoiled a different show altogether.
Yeah, that's right. So the celebrity thing is complicated because they are. I do think I mean, I saw this happen in the trial. He stood up, Jude Law. He stood up because he was witness to phone hacking, and then this is the barrister for Coulson handing him a note and trying to know actually the source was your dad. There's a whole kind of blackmail. And who wants to be a celebrity? So I do have sympathies, and also all human beings have a right to privacy under the HCHER. Even if you're Hugh Grant, you still have a right to privacy.
Yeah, and I think that whole trail of where they're trying to get more and more victims to come forward and stake their reputation on challenging News International, I think is one of the overhanging, what should we call the defeats of the story, that sort of rumbling background tone of how they tried to challenge power but ultimately failed, because there's the line where they say, surely they won't be able to stop an army of people. But actually that's exactly what Murdoch has been able to do over a very, very long period, because they admit, but eventually they begin to admit liability for phone hacking, and they go to the people claiming, and they say, yes, we'll admit liability and we'll give you a payout, but if you try and take us to court, we will rinse you for everything you have. Because if there's a legal catch of, if we offer you something and then you get more, which is higher, then you'll have to pay the damages. So you're stuck in a legal bind of, if you want the truth to come out, if you want the world to know about what's happened to you and the way you've been abused and invaded in by this newspaper, if they offer you a settlement, you effectively have to take it, because if you then try to go to court, even if you win, you're liable for all the damages.
Oh, the costs.
The costs, sorry. And that's another murky world of all these different definitions of costs and damages. And, again, for an ordinary person, if you think, I've been wronged by a newspaper, I want something to happen, and you're suddenly confronted with, okay, it could cost you millions and millions of pounds, and you'll be up against this mega corporation that can bring in 10, 20 lawyers against you, you will settle, and the truth won't come out, but you can maybe feel that something's been done. But that happened over and over again, where people were effectively forced to stay silent because the other alternative was to be bankrupted in the courts.
And this is it's the painful thing about when Nick says, when they're talking about, it didn't work, but you'll get them next time. And Nick was like, I don't have a next time. I think that's the really important thing. And that's why it's so important that they've shown people like Dave Cook, people like Nick Davies having their personal lives fall apart during this, to say, in order to fight these big, powerful people that are doing bad things and hurting lots of people, it's going to take your life. Like, those of us in the activist space have seen our lives curtailed in terms of like not being able to start families because we're just giving everything to the cause. Like it is a real human cost, and they know that in order to fight them, people are going to have to sacrifice everything in their personal life in order to do this, and so that's what keeps people too scared to actually fight back.
Yeah, it's it is deterrent, so it's effective.
We get the introduction of a few more names. There's a lot of names, by the way, and as a relative layperson to a lot of this, I'm just like, I'm just hearing lots of names. Not really seeing people enough. I'm just getting Nick sort of explaining and pulling together lots of names, which, in my opinion, is not very effective for the audience. It gets quite confusing and a little bit off-putting. We do get the name of, I think it's Greg Miskew, and who's the other person who's brought up
Ian
as well?
Edmondson.
Ian Edmondson, there we go. The kind of, this is the mariachi moment, which, again...
I mean, up to that point, I had thought this show's picking up.
Okay.
And it started to get a bit more sober and serious, and you can feel the tension ratcheting up. And then there's a fucking mariachi band when they say the name Ian Edmondson, and I'm like, I know who that is.
Yes.
But we've not seen him in the show. He's not painted as like this grand figure, this target who Nick Davies is really, if we can get Edmondson, if we can get Coulson. They're these sort of anonymous background figures. Absolutely. And the name's introduced, and then there's a mariachi band. And I think an average viewer would be going, what are we celebrating here? What's just happened?
He's happy about what? It's not like stabbing a White Walker, is it? And that's what you want, and then it explodes, you know.
And the problem with this is, I could have been okay with the mariachi band if they had set it up properly.
Yeah.
For example, if they had shown us Ian Edmondson as, for example.
If we'd seen the world of the newspaper and the people, and like they're behind this great barrier, we'll never get to them, and they finally get to them.
Yeah.
But
and also just with the actual direct way they because you had that scene where Nick Davies is sat at the table with Rose Leslie's character, the lawyer, and her client, and he's like,
it's immediately after the Sienna Miller scene.
Yeah, so yes,
this heartbreaking testimony, and then a mariachi band shows up.
Yes, exactly. And he's like, we've got a name. Nick, what's the name? And this name could change everything. it's so camp the way they
Yeah.
hand this up. If they had just literally said,
It's almost a drum roll, please.
Yeah.
No,
and a drum roll to a name that we don't know.
yes.
Yes, that is really problematic.
And I think when you're having to rely on these things as a way of kind of creating drama and creating climax, that's a weakness of storytelling to me, that you're essentially trying to insert sort of vaguely surrealist stuff into the story in a way that just doesn't really work.
It's not coming out of the draw. It's trying like a highlight. It's like you're putting highlight over. This is important.
Yeah, you can imagine the
'cause
sticky
you can't
note that got
understand it.
put on the
Yeah.
script of, mariachi band here, question mark, is that how we create the drama? It's not great. But we see Coulson on trial, right?
Yeah, he's brought into the
questioned,
Tommy
sorry.
Sheridan perjury case,
That's right,
which is
yeah.
another whole other
Which
universe
again
of
was
something.
confusing as a viewer, because I was like, what's this trial? Like,
So it is really confusing. And in fact, he does eventually, spoiler alert, not this ever in drama, get off. So basically, they realise his Tommy Sheridan's, it's not, there's so many people to follow. He could trap him. It's an entrapment. They want to get him on the record denying phone hacking, so they've got leverage over him. But it doesn't really come out. We do see the coalition government in this one, don't we?
Very briefly,
right
yeah.
at the start,
But it's very brief. It's like there's Clegg and Cameron in the distance. We realise he's powerful.
And I think
Yeah.
it's largely a metaphor for the coalition they will also have to build to get this right, as in,
Is there a dung beetle as well anywhere around here? No.
No, the dung beetle sort of disappeared for now.
Maybe it's more out of it hatched the mariachi band.
Maybe.
One thing that I think is highlighted as a common theme that runs throughout the entire show is the notion of ends justifying the means, and playing within the rules and what is the purpose of the rules, the spirit of the rules, that sort of thing. And it's really, really brought to the fore when Nick Davies wants to print the story and is really, really angry at being told that he needs to give the person he's writing about a right of reply and have a quote in there.
And he goes off on one, yeah.
He calls it free advertising space for their lies.
That's very strange. I mean, because it's completely normal to do.
Oh, exactly. We would expect that.
Well, but that's the thing. Like, when you've got a situation where you have proven this person has done this thing, why are you giving them space to say, I didn't do this thing? Like, I remember I was on the BBC recently where I said, I think it was Trump has lied. And the topic I was actually invited to talk about was him saying that Ukraine started the war. And like, I'm being brought in to discuss the fact that Trump has lied, and yet you're still giving him right of reply on things when you know that he's a liar. Like, why are we giving... I don't agree with this notion of still allowing this right of reply when you know they're simply going to say something you've proven to be false.
But I think it's different there, is that's your opinion about a public figure when you're revealing stuff for the first time.
Yeah.
And just as a journalist,
And a reporting function as well.
and you may have it wrong, right? You have to. Often I hate doing them. Don't get me wrong. I used to dislike them, and now I love them. So I was just doing one on Farage and on that, and not that he'll reply.
I was going to say, did he reply?
No, and I had like 20 questions about this guy Gil. But you do sometimes get things wrong, you know. And you're not there. You're not in the room now. We know how powerful Murdoch was covering up all the. And Nick only touched the sort of tip of an iceberg with this wrongdoing. We go, why to give right of reply? But sometimes you're just guessing, and you got it completely wrong, and you only find out when you get the legal letter. Actually, to be honest, you get the legal letter when actually you're right, and they're really scared. Often you're like, mate, you got it, and you have a chat with them. And you got it wrong.
Oh yeah, and anything that's subjective or hearsay or you might possibly be wrong, I get it.
Oh, it's not opinion; it's a new fact, right?
Yeah.
These are new facts.
It's an allegation
Trump is a
against-
liar is a public discourse, political discourse. The X has done Y to Z, which could be illegal or wrong or unlawful, but you've just discovered it. I think that's the difference.
Because as a journalist, you're always working with the facts you know, and like you have to. I just think you have to be like, sometimes this could just change.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think that scene was useful. Maybe it didn't fit within the drama, but as a kind of an insider look into journalism, it summarised that the scene Femi's talking about where he's shouting at the Guardian executives. I think it was a useful summary of the frustrations you will have experienced researching and reporting stories for months and months and thinking, I've got to keep going back to this person and they keep denying it. And you have to include those denials. But actually in this case, I think Nick Davies wanted those denials because they all stacked up.
Yes.
And we find in the end that all those denials were proven wrong.
It's like the Coulson thing, perjury. You want a denial because then you got them cornered.
Yeah. So it's a frustrating element of good journalism, and I think to capture that in a 30-second scene where he's shouting was actually a better moment of the drama to show that it is a frustrating necessity.
But I think
good
they might have
reporting.
dramatised Nick's
Oh, I don't
objection
think Nick
to
would
it.
have been yelling.
'Cause
You don't
no,
think
no.
he actually
No.
objects to?
It's he's being the audience.
And hopefully
there.
doesn't yell at people.
I think
in the
that's it.
office.
Is he's the audience perspective of like, why do we have to go and get this guy's view
But he
again?
would
We
know.
know he's lying.
Yeah, I agree with that. He becomes the kind of layperson almost
Yeah.
in a
Yeah,
sense
yeah.
in that conversation in that room. So, yeah, no, it's an interesting scene. We do also get the entrance of Gordon Brown
Mm-hmm.
at the end of the episode.
Hello.
Our previous prime minister, about 6 prime
Hello,
ministers ago, was it?
Good actor. He was. I thought. I know Gordon
Do you
Brown.
know
a
who
bit.
he is?
I don't know the actor. I worked
Okay.
with Gordon Brown back in the 90s, and it keeps very helpful with Daniel Morgan. I quite like Gordon actually. But it was. I thought it was a good.
It's fiercely
depiction of
He's
Gordon.
got the
Man.
I didn't think he looked the part, but he's got the voice.
He's got the
down
voice
for it,
and
yeah.
the stillness.
gravitas
Yes.
And the
of
gravitas.
something.
Because he's very considered, not the most, I always say that he and Blair was the two halves of a divided soul. Blair had all the blitz and bling, and Gordon had the sort of quiet. And I think it got that, yeah. And also, he's quite remorseless. He wouldn't forget. I mean, it's not in this bit of the show, but, he was close to Rebecca Brooks, and they revealed awful things about his lost baby. He was very hurt by them.
Yeah, I never. Obviously, we know quite a bit, although it's not really in the show, weirdly, with Tony Blair. But we know quite a bit about Tony Blair's relationship with the Murdochs, and obviously, in that infamous meeting that he has before. Is it just after he becomes leader?
Yes, he goes
Yeah.
to Hayward Island, the fly out.
the anointing of
Yeah.
Tony
And
Blair
then-
essentially as our next prime minister.
And then literally anointing in the River Jordan as godfather of the two
Oh,
kids with
wow.
Wendy Deng in 2001 or whatever that was.
So I feel like I know a lot about Tony Blair's relationship with Murdoch. I was more hazy on Gordon Brown's. My impression from watching this show is that there was a kind of, does Gordon Brown kind of accept that that's the reality when he's in politics, and so we have to work with this person? I don't know how much he behind the scenes really begrudges Murdoch, and there is this idea,
Yeah.
I think, that actually he did.
There was
begrudge
a
him.
long. I mean, during the meat of the new Labour era, there was a very close relationship between both Blair and Brown and the Murdochs, and I think even Sarah Brown and Rebecca Brooks were quite close
Besties.
friends.
And he went to
Really?
the wedding, yeah. It was Sarah McCook Brown was.
Yeah, which is another element of this show that's missing is no mention of the Chipping Norton set or the
What we
ongoing
call the Chopping Snortum set.
the
as well.
Chopping
Please
Norton
explain
set.
give us a bit of background.
So
on
the
that.
Chipping Norton set. Chipping Norton is a village in Oxfordshire where
Well, it's a town.
yeah, where David Cameron and Rebecca Brooks and Jeremy Clarkson all lived next door,
Jeremy
And,
Clarkson.
and James Murdoch.
and James Murdoch.
All the best people.
All the best people all lived next door to one another. They all went to each other's dinner parties and they all hang out and they took their children to the same schools.
Christ.
And they were
riding.
very, very good friends. And they went horse riding with one another. This was the thing that came out ahead of Leveson was Rebecca Brooks had leased an ex-police horse Ricer.
Yeah.
And she and David Cameron went riding on it. So it became the Chipping Norton set or the Chop and Snorton set.
Not alleging that any of these.
Not alleging that of any activities at all. It's just a funny sounding name for a place. But that was one. I mean, that was just the nature of politics and the media for a very long time. It wasn't just that one town. It was all of these relationships and
And you
personal connections.
had to pay court
Yes.
to Murdoch. And Gordon Brown did, but then famously, this is not in the show, but it is in Nick's book, Hack Attack, a lot about the Sky B takeover. And basically, because Cameron was willing to accept Coulson as press space, they thought, here's the better bet to get back him to go into power. And Rebecca was close to him, so we can get our bid going ahead. And she had this front page, yes, we can. And she
Yeah.
switched
Yeah.
support for Gordon, because they'd supported New Labour all through the noughties.
I remember that.
Yeah, so it's a switch. So Gordon was aggrieved about that. I just have to say one thing, though, because it's a fascinating example of disinformation. So when Jackie Hames gave her witness statement about a personal appeared at Leveson to talk about the surveillance on her and the devastation from this, I don't know if they knew by then it was Mazza Mahmood, but they knew it's news of the world, and thinking Jill Dando had died, thought she was being targeted. That statement that morning, as she's about to talk, a certain journalist, who I'm happy to name, had got the story about Race of the police horse and released it, and everybody talked about that, and not about Jackie Hames. The journalist's name is Tom Harper. He worked for The Independent then. He was very handy to Rebecca that all the distraction was away from what Jackie Hames was saying in this meeting, and he instantly got a job at the Sunday Times afterwards.
Yeah.
Can't imagine
Funny
why
how that happens.
Oh, it's just
It's a coincidence.
Just
Yeah.
coincidence. So there was a lot of news management around dropping juicy bits of the story. The classic one is when they, after this, sorry, last observation, not in the show, but I remember, because I remember Les Hinton getting in contact with me about the allegations in Isabel Oakeshott's book about David Cameron and the pig, if you remember that, right? The long and the short of it is, it's never been proven, disgusting allegation of the dead pig, he put his member inside it. Probably came from somebody like Boris Johnson. If somebody had once said they'd once seen a photograph,
Because they were
of
both
this photograph.
at Oxford together, weren't
They're
they?
both in the Bullingdon Club. Yeah.
Yes.
Anyway, both were in the Bullingdon Club. That was released as punishment for Cameron after Levison.
But so this is the kind of thing that you were talking about before about not really showing the actual individuals of the dirty behavior of the journalists at these places, because like they point at it but don't shine a light on it. They will generally hint towards the problem but not really go into detail or show us the detail of it.
Yeah.
For example, with how every time they try and put out a story, it's reliant on other news organizations to actually jump on that story as well for it to actually become part of the news cycle.
Yes.
So where are we seeing that pushback from the potentially decent journalists at those other news organizations saying, hey, we could write about this, and then the editors saying, no, we're not writing about that.
Yeah, it's presented for a long time as if the other papers are just sort of bored or not interested in it, when the fact is they're terrified of it.
Yes,
Because they know that they
colluding
will
in
get
it.
the same treatment as The Guardian is getting.
Or involved, like
or they're
Yeah,
involved.
or they're
Morgan's
implicated.
Mirror Group,
Yes.
they were using phone hacking.
Yeah.
Beyond doubt, he knew the job.
So yeah, it's the whole time there's three parts to this story. There is the hacking and the abuse and the malfeasance. Then there's the political corruption and the relationships. And then there's all the tying in with the police. But for a long time, we're focused just on the investigation into hacking, but without that context on how it was allowed to happen, the culture in the newspaper, the way that the relationship between politicians allowed it to go uninvestigated, all the massive amounts of compromat that they were building up on generations of politicians or people in public life. That's sort of still left out of this story. It makes it seem like a very quite minimal crime and minimal abuse of power, that it's just about invasion of privacy. No, it was about the whole of public life in Britain was reshaped by these papers.
And as it's what you just described is perfectly nailed in the fact that when they're trying to prove a culture, they just point to 4 editors. They say this proves the culture. No, where's the culture? Where are all the thousands of journalists underneath them
Who are
who are all
doing
working
this.
to the same principle?
Yeah.
In a way, it makes me think, much that I'm glad they covered the Daniel Morgan story. I'm really glad that, that's got more airtime and the stakes are much, much higher, because there's another suspicious suicide murder exactly that time, Daniel's friend Taffy Holmes. So it's a really serious story of police corruption. But I wish they'd spent the other 3 episodes doing this stuff, the politics, Tony
That's what I was
Blair,
waiting for,
and the culture of the newsroom, showing them how the working, showing them, as we now know from Nick's update of the book, he claims they carried on hacking him and all the DCMS members, Tom Watson, and all those while it was going on.
Yeah.
It's strange
Go.
because in so many ways, like, you're better off watching something quite fictional, like The Thick of It, to understand the relationship at time.
Yeah.
And they don't talk about phone hacking, I don't think. Actually, maybe they do in the
They
last
have
series.
they have a
an
parallel inquiry which is very much copied from
Yes.
the furore around Leveson,
Yeah.
which is into leaking,
And
the culture of leaking.
That's it, yeah, and they're all there. They're all at it, basically. But
Yeah.
in many ways, you're better off watching that, because that
Yeah.
gives you a better insight into
And you
these
have
things. And
identifiable single figures. The
Yeah.
problem with
You
all
do.
these names, because there are thousands of victims of phone hacking, how do you embody it in one person?
and then the show it violates that most basic principle of sort of TV writing, which is show, not tell.
Yeah.
I feel like we're just being told all the time everything, but we're not really being shown it, and that's not convincing.
Can you imagine just imagine that we lived in the world where season 1 of this show was the hacking and season 2 was Daniel Morgan?
Yeah.
Watch
I do
this
think
space.
it's a case for why, again, we've mentioned it before, the American Crime Story series, the OJ case, the Monica Lewinsky case,
Yep.
the Gianni Versace murder. They were 10 episodes, and they went through the whole universe of those cases. So they didn't just go into the assembling of the legal teams around OJ. They didn't just go into the Monica, what was Monica saying on the phone as she was being tapped. It went into all of these little pots of bits on the side, like Matt Drudge comes up in the Monica Lewinsky case, and you think Matt Drudge was a very, very small part of that, but it captures an essential part of the world that was going on around the Monica Lewinsky case, the introduction of the internet. There are so many bits of politics and developments in media, mass deletion of emails at News International, how the police were sort of inadvertently or maybe willingly covering up what was going on and not investigating these things. They get covered so briefly, but we have, as you say, sort of 2.5 episodes of this series, which are tragically sort of, I don't want to say distracted, but they're pulling the audience in two different directions. And they haven't yet convincingly, I mean, by this point, as I say, the Daniel Morgan story is unfortunately dropped. But what could have been done with that time instead? And then using that same amount of time for the Daniel Morgan murder at the same time in another series, how much more potential there would have been in it.
Well, I am obviously, you may not know, I'm working on a series of Daniel Morgan with Sky, which will be just that one, but we'll see what happens to that. Yeah, it makes me think that, you know, you need that single figure like Monica Lewinsky, like OJ, where, and there's no real single figure because it's not All the President's Men, because it's not that kind of story. That's a film, and so that I never saw Mr. Bates in the Post Office. Did you guys see it? There's only 4 episodes, but obviously it's one person goes through the whole ringer, standing for everybody else, the thousands of other post office keepers who are taking that ring. And I think that identification with one person is, unfortunately, that's what drama's all about.
But I think even with, you know, the Monica Lewinsky case, a lot of the episodes are about Monica Lewinsky's experience, but then it goes and looks at life in the White House with Bill Clinton, or how...
But that's her experience. You've got an entry through her.
Yeah, but it's how her story diverges across different spaces, and then looking into those spaces. So there was an opportunity here to do that, and as we've said before, was it legal problems? Was it reluctance? Was it cowardice of why they didn't decide? Let's do an episode that does a history of the culture in the news of the world, what it was like to report there, how horrendous it was, the abuses they got away with, examples of all these stories you will have seen but maybe didn't know what was going on behind the scenes. Not having that in this show really damages its impact.
Yeah, so when it's always a problem with TV drama, you need a point of view, right? But, you know, you also have a point of view of the bad guys. I mean, I always think of it should be, the news of the world should be like that bit in Scarface, you know, when they're raking in the money. Yeah, got rid of
it's
that
so
one.
good. And you got the money going through the money machine and the music's going.
You have that with, and he's gone, Toe Job, you know, Mellor's gone,
Perfect.
Ashdown's gone. And they turn up, that guy, Gilligan, was it? No, Milligan, the MP who unfortunately died while autoerotic asphyxiation. And they turned up at the party covered in bin bags and orange in the mouth. I mean, it was complete. The guy, it was John Ross now, who's dead. He was a corrupt cop. He became a fixer. I call him a corrupt cop because he's dead, but he was actually left. He was investigated for corruption, and he became the big fixer for News of the World, for the press. And he turns up, he gets the information on this guy, how this guy's died on this unfortunate autoerotic accident, and turns up with an orange in his mouth wearing a bin bag.
Do you want to see a better media in the world? Then check out the Better Media Bill, the Better Media Fund, and if you want a better media, then support the regulator Impress. You can find out how to at the link list bettermedia.world, which has links to loads of great ways to get involved and with making a better media for all.